I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to Book Culture. I'm so thrilled to welcome you all here to celebrate the release of Soul by Soul, the Evangelical Mission to Spread the Gospel to Muslims by Adriana Carranca. Round of applause. My name's Cody, and I help with the events here at Book Culture, and we're so thrilled again to have you all in this space to celebrate new exciting work. Maybe a quick show of hands if this is your first time to Book Culture. Welcome. For a little over 25 years, Book Culture has been a space to celebrate new and exciting scholarly and academic work. So again, we're so thrilled to have you all here in this space for this conversation, for this panel. A couple of procedural points for the evening. There is a restroom through that wooden door there. It's the door on the left-hand side. At the conclusion of the talk, we will have registers set up there at the back where we will have 1 or 2 or 15 copies of the book available. And I encourage you to pick up a copy today so that we can be here for 25 years more, at least. I hold my props. If not, silence your cell phone now. This would be a great time to do that so as not to disrupt the talk. We've been handing out index cards and little pencils. So that way for the Q&A, we'll collect any questions that people have on those index cards. So that way we can just move through the questions quickly so that way everybody gets a chance. And at the conclusion of the conversation part, when we open to questions, I can also come around and make sure everybody has index cards or pencils. I think that's everything for me. So I'm going to welcome up Patricia Kranz, the Executive Director of the Overseas Press Club.
Well, he said some of what I was going to say, but welcome to this special program that's co-sponsored by Columbia Global Reports, the Overseas Press Club of America, and the Columbia Global Center in Rio de Janeiro to celebrate Adriana Carranca's new book, Soul by Soul. As he said, I'm Patricia Kranz. I'm Executive Director of the Overseas Press Club. It's the largest and oldest association in the United States of journalists engaged in international news. We just celebrated our 85th annual awards dinner last Thursday. And that means we were founded in 1939 by correspondents who were returning from covering Hitler or the Spanish Civil War and decided they wanted to have a place to mingle with their compatriots. Now our members come from all parts of the world, ranging from top editors to staff journalists to freelancers. And in the past few years, we've funded safety trainings for journalists covering hostile environments, civil unrest, and those suffering from mental trauma. And the OPC website hosts a training archive that includes videos of all of our programs and hosted in New York, and now most of them are on Zoom and some are in other parts of the world. The OPC Foundation is our sister organization that is a nonprofit that provides scholarships and fellowships every year to students graduating from journalism school. And in fact, Adriana won the OPC Foundation's Harper's Magazine Fellowship in memory of I.F. Stone in 2018. So we're proud of that. Tonight's panel will be moderated by Sam Freedman, an award-winning author and professor at Columbia School of Journalism. He is a former columnist for the New York Times and has written 10 books. Sam teaches a class in book writing and has helped develop more than 100 authors, editors, and agents. Adriana was a student of Sam's during her time at Columbia Journalism School. And I will now turn it over to Sam.
Thank you. I'll try to do this from here and in my unmiked way. Is everyone fine with that so far? Enough years in the classroom help. And I'll try to move briskly along so you can hear from Adriana and our incredible panelists. I'm thrilled to be moderating tonight. I'm thankful on behalf of everyone here to Book Culture for standing in when we moved this event out of Columbia Journalism School for reasons we all know too well. And Book Culture indeed has been an adornment to this neighborhood for many years. And I just want to say, not only should you consider it a requirement buy Adriana's book tonight, but we expect you to buy other books as well. And we'll be checking on the way out. It's also a great honor to present a book from Columbia Global Reports tonight. If you don't know about that imprint, Columbia Global Reports is a publishing project that's founded by my colleague and friend, our former dean and current professor at the J School, Nick Lemon. It's published 12 books by Columbia alumni, including Adriana. And I should also give a shout out to a couple of people from the Columbia Global Reports team who are here tonight. There are many of them, but Camille McDuffie, who's the publisher, and Jimmy So, who is the editor on this book and many others. The reason I'm here and Nick isn't is that Nick has his students in Washington, D.C. today. And so I'll just tell you very quickly about Columbia Global Reports. It's a unique nonprofit publishing imprint that has a mandate to look around the corner and to publish on underreported topics, both domestically and internationally, and to get important issues that aren't on many people's radar screens, get them some visibility. And Columbia Global Reports, as a nonprofit, is supported by its readers and its donors. And so, of course, we're thankful to all those who are sacrificial on behalf of Columbia Global Reports. And Soul to Soul specifically is supported by a gift from the Mellon Foundation. And on the subject of gratitude, we have an amazing author and two exceptional panelists tonight. Moving from your right to your left, we have our author, Adriana Carranca. Adriana is a writer and journalist from Brazil. She's extensively covered the war in Afghanistan and other major events around the globe. She studied at LSE, the London School of Economics, and here at the Columbia J School, of course. And joining her tonight to talk about this book about Brazilian missionaries and their work through the Middle East and South Asia, again, are two exceptional journalists on their own account. Graciela Mochkofsky is the dean of our friendly rival, Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY, which, believe me, keeps us on our toes every year. But I also have to say we claim her too because she is an alum of Columbia Journalism. Graciela is a native of Argentina, and she's been active and award-winning journalist. In fact, I taught one of her wonderful books, Prophet of the Andes, in my book writing class just this year. You also can see a lot of her work. That's one of 7 of her books, some in English, some in Spanish, some in both languages. And she also writes often for the New Yorker. In fact, you may have seen a terrific essay she wrote about Adriana's book just in the last couple of days. It's up on the New Yorker website right now. And next to Graciela is another one of my Columbia colleagues, Sarah Stillman, an award-winning journalist and also staff writer at the New Yorker. And she teaches investigative reporting at Yale and created one of the real linchpins of Columbia's postgraduate studies or postmaster studies for our best students, the Global Migration Project. And Adriana was one of the people there. And Sarah has written on topics ranging from civil forfeiture to debtors' prisons to drug cartels and other kinds of light effervescent topics. In any case, I want to turn right to Soul by Soul and also to assure you that we're going to say about the last 15 minutes for your questions, which will come to me on index cards so I can sit through them and choose the most urgent or the ones that come up most often. Now, I'm going to start, of course, with the author of the moment, Adriana. And Adriana, one of the things I know from 10 books, this is your first, is that at most book events, people actually haven't read your book yet. So I wonder if I could start with a fairly obvious question, which is to tell us a bit about what the book covers and also the amazing story of how you came on to this subject.
Yeah, so thank you very much for being here all year. I appreciate that. I can't say enough how much I'm grateful to Columbia Global Reports and to book culture as well. I just lived here, right next to in the building next to bookstore, and I was here every day during my time at Columbia. I love this place, and the Overseas Press Club as well, and of course, Graciela and Sarah and Sam. I can't say enough how much they taught me and they inspired me in institute. So the book began in 2008 when I was reporting on the war in Afghanistan. And there was this, another Brazilian there having the communication for the ICRC. And I said, you know, we don't know any other Brazilians here. Brazil had no relationship whatsoever with Afghanistan. Many Brazilians even, I think, don't know where Afghanistan is. We don't have any commercial relations with them. No embassy, nothing. So I said, do you know any other Brazilians? You know, just thinking about stories that I could write for the newspaper. And she said, yeah, there is this couple that is here and they run a pizza delivery business. And I said, oh no, they don't. No, they don't. There must be, you know, I immediately thought either mercenaries or drug dealers, because Afghanistan has a history of opium trade, and
Yeah,
so.
that poppy pizza is real good.
But we did immediately order pizza. I said, Graciela, it was, her name is Graciela. So, and I said, Graciela, let's order pizza right now. And then came this Afghan boy, who, young person who delivered the pizza, and I couldn't take anything out of that. So, but that's that thing of this couple selling, you know, going to Afghanistan to run a pizza delivery business was odd enough for me, never forgetting the story. And I would go back to that and try, you know, it took me 2 years to finally find them. I don't even remember how I found Louis'
What was it
father.
they were really doing?
Yeah, I didn't know yet. I just called, I found him. I just found a note somewhere about Brazilians being in Afghanistan, and there was a surname. So I called everyone in this small city in Brazil that had the same surname. And then finally, and I would just ask, you know, I think I met someone in your family in Afghanistan, and people would say, and one finally said, yes, it's my son, he lives there, and you know, he's here now, he's taking some health tests, and you can call later. And then I called, he agreed to meet me at the airport, but he didn't say much at that time. He just told me, you know, you really want to know what I do in Afghanistan? And I said, yes, and he said, come visit. So I did.
And let's cut to the chase. What did he do? In a word.
So he was an undercover missionary in Afghanistan. He and his wife, they had 2 kids. He was, I had never heard of that before. To me, missionaries were, you know, young boys who distributed Bibles when I was a child, American boys. I never thought of Latin Americans. Yes. And then when I went back in 2011 to see them in 2012, and then I started meeting this entire group, huge group of Argentinians, Colombians, Chile, people from Chile, you know, all over Latin America, many Brazilians. Brazil is now the 2nd largest sending country of missionaries, behind only the US. And thousands of Brazilians are in the Middle East and South Africa.
And just to underscore it, we're going to swing back to it a little repeatedly during the night. Right, these are not Catholics, as one might imagine. These are evangelical.
Evangelical, yeah.
And the objects of their proselytizing are who?
Are Muslims. So the history behind it is, I remember he doing this during his class. He really helped me to nail down the story. I had the same situation, I remember.
Well, take it as a compliment.
It is. Because, yeah, he would call every student to sit and tell the story of the book, and he would just do it. So I'm grateful. And yeah, so they, the story behind it, you know, the overall is about the change that Latin America went through, starting in more in the, like, when you started really seeing that was in the 70s, that Latin America turned from 4 centuries being under Roman Catholic Church to Protestantism. And actually, evangelicalism specifically, because most missionaries that went to Brazil were American evangelicals. And that's in Brazil and in most Latin America, we don't differentiate. We just call everybody that's Protestant, we call them evangelicals.
So that actually gives a great segue. Graciela, of course, is from Argentina, has done a lot of her books and journalism out of South America and other parts of the global. And although it ends up being a really quirky, sui generis story of some Argentine Christians, or rather Peruvian Christians who decide to become Orthodox Jews, whole other story. You know a lot about this religious flux that's happening in the global South. Why is it happening? Who's driving it? What are the theological and, if relevant, political purposes of it?
Right, thank you. So, thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad. And just buy the book. It's an amazing book. I read it, I wrote about it. It's really extraordinary. So to me, I'll just say a couple of things about the book that could help answer that question. This is one of the reasons this book is so extraordinary. First, because there's very few very little information, and certainly no other book about the phenomenon that she's describing. These Pentecostals from this global South going to the Middle East and to Muslim countries to convert Muslims into Christianity, because those are the unreached by Christianity. So those are areas that have very few Christians. Christians are in the minority, and are where the majority of the Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists people in the world live. And so this has been since the early 90s a target for the evangelical movements in the US as part of their efforts to convert everybody into Christianity for religious reasons. And so the part I didn't know that. And the book I wrote starts also, it's kind of a spin-off of the phenomena that she describes in her book. And the phenomena is that since the 50s, Latin America, a continent that was basically Catholic for 400 years, and where the Catholic Church has had a hegemony, started losing the church started losing that hegemony, and Evangelical Mission is sent from this country, started evangelizing and bringing a different type of Christianity. So this is all within Christianity. So it's not conversion out of Christianity, but it's people moving from one church to other churches. And that has changed the political balance in the region, particularly in Brazil, in Guatemala, and it's growing now around across the nation. Pentecostalism is a religion that is growing the fastest in the entire world, and is driving the growth of Christianity, particularly in the global South, Latin America and Africa mostly, but also Asia. And it's a story that is phenomenal, that has incredible impact, and that has sent waves of change into the political and the socio-economical makeup of the region and of the global South. And there's millions of papers and books and academic work around this, but there's very, very little journalism and narrative about it that reaches a larger audience. So I think that's why this book is so important, because it really comes to fill a void of information for the general public around something that is touching so many people. I remember in Argentina, I have a Jewish father and a Catholic mother, and so I kind of grew up between those two identities. And Argentina has a very large Jewish community and a very Catholic country. And I had no idea that has started happening in my country. And in the 90s, I saw this American evangelical pastor come to the church, to a very big bookstore around the corner of my house. And then there were these hundreds of thousands of people marching towards this guy. And we were like, where did these people come from? I mean, who are they? And they were all evangelical, and they were my neighbor. I mean, they didn't live in my neighborhood, but they lived in my city. And so they have been completely under the radar for a very long time for journalism and for the majority of the people who are not part of those communities. So I think that's one of the very important topics, and the fact that, and so this, the final idea I want to share for now is that shift from Catholicism in Latin America, from Catholicism to Protestantism, and it's not just evangelicals, different type of evangelical churches like Pentecostals, but then many other, also Seventh-day Adventists and many other churches that have their origin in the US that are now very much present and growing in the region. And that has also created this new phenomenon, which is that people don't stay in churches and they don't stay in the church or the religion that they were raised into, but they also keep changing. There's a lot of shifting from one church to another church. And my interpretation of what I learned while I was doing my book is that once people have this realization that they were not, that they could actually leave the Catholic Church and they could be something that wasn't Catholic, they could be anything. So why stay? So there's now all of these new, there's a lot of conversion into Judaism. There's like 60 groups that came from churches that are now Jewish throughout the region. And it's like an emerging Jewish life that is not connected to traditional Judaism at all. It has no history of Judaism. Then there's a whole group of people converting to Islam. And there's a lot of groups, people converting to very different things. So there's this sense of religious freedom that was not present in the region. That is very, very interesting.
I want to turn to really the other pole of this book. If you think of this as a book that has one foot in Brazil, the other is in Afghanistan. And you talked about that wonderful anecdote of finding out about, the Poppy pizza delivery folks. But really that's part of a larger group of people from all over the world who ended up in this catch basin of Afghanistan in the wake of the American invasion and this attempt to remake the society there. Sarah, you were there for a lot of time as a journalist. Where does, this couple fit in? Who else was there and what brought people to Afghanistan?
Yeah, well, I have to say, this book reads like a thriller and you will find adventures there. I love it. It's about like big ideas, but it also is just at the granular level. The writing is so compelling that I got so pulled in by the pizza delivery story. And when I was writing it, I kept thinking about the very first reporting experience I ever had for the New Yorker was in Iraq, and then later for that same piece in Afghanistan. I had been a freshman in college when the Iraq War began. In high school when the war in Afghanistan began. And I knew when I graduated, I wanted to report on these wars, but I felt completely unqualified to do so. And I didn't know what my entry point was. And then I grew up in a family of labor rights activists. And I'd seen on TV that a group of Nepalese workers who thought they'd been promised good jobs in Dubai have been brought onto US military bases in Iraq, unbeknownst to them. Literally before they even got to the base, they're captured by Sunni insurgents, and a bunch of them were killed. And at that point in time, I started looking into what is this community of Nepalese workers? I started digging and I found there's 80,000 workers from other countries on US bases in both Iraq and Afghanistan who've been brought in from Fiji, Nepal, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, from all around the world, many of whom were from Christian nations. And they had most of the time when I flew over there and started doing these interviews, I was thinking of your pizza thing because I flew into Baghdad, and the very first thing that you see when you land on the largest US military base in Baghdad is a beauty salon staffed by Fijian women, a Pizza Hut staffed by Indians, a Cinnabon staffed by Nepalese workers. And so you're in this
Not my soul.
you're in this totally surreal space where I just started wondering about what are the lives of these workers like, and one of the only places where they actually had some form of social equality on the base was in the church, where military service members and those who were working in service positions, they were basically doing all the laundry, making all the food, cleaning the latrines, often doing some of the most dangerous jobs in the war. And one thing, I don't want to jump ahead to the question and answer stage, but one thing I was so curious about when I was reading your book is that a lot of these workers were treated so horribly and were essentially trafficking victims. And then when their contracts weren't renewed, or at the end of the withdrawal in Afghanistan, they were just kind of booted out on the street, not given plane tickets home. And they wound up going into the communities, and it made me quite curious. There's now like a reasonably sized community from each of those different nations that had worked as part of the US military project in both Afghanistan and Iraq, who just entered the community and are living there because they actually just literally couldn't afford it to get home, or because they had other reasons. And I wondered if, now that I read your book, I was thinking like, I wonder if some of their reasons, since many of them were actually very religious, if that was intersected with this story at all.
I'd like you to hold on to that.
Yeah, okay, it's a plan. Question and answer
You know, this is a book about conversion, or the effort to convert people. So what was the pitch that, seriously, what was the pitch that this missionary couple made to Muslims? And was it at all successful?
So, yeah, well, it was not really a pitch, what they do, and that's why Latin Americans became so successful in being missionaries, is because, and they are, is, well, more than Americans, at least is the consensus among the evangelical community, is that Latin Americans are more efficient because they just make friends.
I thought you were gonna say they
Feijoada, yes, and barbecue, and I saw that. I went to many barbecues in Afghanistan, and soccer is a major entry point. You know, when you talk to Iraqis and Afghans and you talk about Brazil, they think of soccer immediately. And this is opens any doors. You know, when you go to Afghanistan, people, when you say, I'm from Brazil. I remember one time that I was leaving Afghanistan, I was crying because I'm a crying person. I was crying. And then, where do you come from? Brazil. Why are you crying? Leaving Afghanistan. Yes, when you say Brazil, they just open this smile and they immediately relate, also because Brazil is not involved in any wars. Most Latin American countries are not. So they don't think of Brazil as, you know, there is not that resistance that they have of listening to Americans.
But at some point, you have to close the deal. You're trying to convert people, and I totally get it. That the way in is to model community, to be non-judgmental, to share food or soccer or whatever else. But at a certain point, the pivot has to come. And what is it, you know, because you could have, as long as the feijoada is halal, you could have, you know, Muslims over for feijoada. You could certainly play or watch soccer with Muslims. But at a certain point, there's going to be theological aspect that's made. So what did that entail?
So in the beginning in Afghanistan, they would be more direct. So this couple, for example, they started the school in their own home, and they would just pray with the children, even though they couldn't understand the words, but they would just repeat amen at the end, and they would see, the missionaries would see that as a positive sign. But as the situation became more dangerous in Afghanistan, they started to be more careful about this. And they just really made friends, and they employ people, and they have normal relationships with people in which they understand themselves as the example, you know, the ambassadors of Jesus. So they have to be these irrepressible people. They have to be a happy couple. The children need to be smart and happy. So they are an example. And I saw myself, Afghans asking, why are you so happy? Is that, and then that's how they say, oh, because do you know Jesus? And they know Jesus because in the Quran, Isa is mentioned several times, I think 25 times. So it is someone familiar to them. And they normally, because Afghanistan became so dangerous, they will never say, you know, you want to convert or let's. I saw that in Iraq, in Kurdistan, I saw that more direct preaching, because in Kurdistan, northern Iraq, you have churches, official churches, so it's easier. But in Afghanistan, it was so dangerous that they would just really make friends. And even the converted people, they would still go to the mosque many times because they cannot simply stop going to the mosque, and the families were going to feel, you know, it's strange. One of the Christians, the convert who worked at the school, she got married to this taxi driver that I also described in the book, and and they had to do that. It had to be a Muslim wedding, because weddings are very important in Afghanistan. They normally set tribal agreements, and so it's very important. And they could just make a Christian thing, so they did a Muslim wedding.
So I want to toss this over to Graciela and Sarah. I also want to remind you, please start jotting down your questions on your index cards, because in about 10 or 15 minutes, we'll get to that. But, you know, Graciela, you were talking about an idea that one of my former New York Times colleagues, Stephen Douglas, once titled the magazine, was choosing your religion. And the idea that people in a historically homogeneously Catholic continent realize in this era of globalization, like, wow, I can choose to be something else. And Sarah, you talked about religion actually being one of the few social levelers, as well as I can only imagine a source of solace for these nationals from other countries who've been dumped into these highly exploitative jobs. But beyond that, from each of your perspective, what's sort of the political use of evangelical Christianity as it enters into other continents or places in extremis as Iraq and Afghanistan were? Is it more than just a matter of, I really do feel that Jesus is the divinity and, you know, Muhammad, in retrospect, wasn't the final revelation and so forth? What's the other purpose?
So I think I'm gonna answer that question because I read the book, because I know about my region, but I think one fascinating thing about this book is that, and that answers the question, is that it starts with American missionaries and American churches, the American evangelical movement, making this decision to go into this unreached area, which is more than Afghanistan, it's the whole, the north of Africa, the Middle East, and south of India, pieces of Asia, kind of that central north of Africa, south of, Middle East, and it's called the 10-40 window, but it's just this between 10 and 40, how do you call that? Parallels,
Yeah.
thank you. And so it starts with Americans invading Afghanistan actually, and sending missionaries, American missionaries. American missionaries are not welcome because it's an occupying force. Hello. And so they're not there, they start being killed, so they have to leave. And so these churches, these American churches have spent decades actually creating and a movement in the global south. And they have funded, they have trained, they have encouraged, they have created this movement that is now millions and millions of people that still are that have local leadership, but that local leadership is very much connected to American churches and American leaders and American geopolitical agenda. And so something critical for me to understand this phenomenon as a political phenomenon, which is what it is, in my opinion, I'm not a religious person, is that this is an American imperialistic agenda around the world, a way of looking at the world and, having this religious conquest and using global South leaders as proxy to take this agenda to where it's not yet, a reality, or it's not, and grow their churches and their movements and their power in those areas. And the book begins with, it begins there, and then it ends with a group of Afghani, about 87, I think, Afghani, formerly Muslim converts who are then displaced because of American intervention and then end up in Brazil as refugees with the help of these families. So that circle actually, to me, was fascinating because it's like, it's this, this evangelic, this conversion by proxy, but also displacing people, and then everybody ends up in the global south, but by this American intervention. So to me, that was really important in the book.
Yeah, that was sort of a perfect answer. I really, it's hard to add more to that aside from, I guess one thing I was thinking about as I was reading the book, because I think you summarize very well, that you
I'm
document.
sorry.
No,
What did you say?
no, it's perfect. I was thinking that you do such a good job in the book of showing the kind of colonial imperial project being so inextricably bound up in these religion by proxy, kind of US pushing it south to South America and then that being used as a kind of avatar for the same strategies being deployed in the Middle East. And it actually made me think about, I didn't know much about Samaritans first, and I was doing some reporting down in Louisiana after a major hurricane, and then I was doing a project tied to disaster recovery workers and their exploitation. And each place that I kept going after a major hurricane, Billy Graham's organization that you write about in the book was there. And as I was reading your book, I was thinking about the ways in which that path, that trajectory of conversions, it also seems to map onto just like this context of profound vulnerability, whether it's like US, in the deep south right after a hurricane, or whether it's in the midst of like a very serious imperial conflict zone.
The way they see it is that, the way that these true believers came to see it, so as Graciela said, there is a project that is basically led by the US, but you have these true believers on the ground, these missionaries, that the way they came to see it was that, wars and vulnerability in the Middle East happen because people don't know Jesus. And they truly believe that. They really believe that the answer to all problems in the Middle East and Asia, all the wars in Iraq and the wars in Afghanistan, and Syria and all that, is because people don't know Jesus. So it became, and this was a very brilliant of Louis Bush, who is Argentinian, this evangelical strategist, who is Argentinian, who kind of crisscrossed the poorest of the poor in the world and the least reached people with the gospel, and kind of draw this map of the 21st century project to evangelize the world, which is called the 1040 window.
Well, we're getting the cards collected. I want to ask a follow-up on that, which kind of builds off of, I think it was Graciela, maybe it was Sarah who talked about the Afghan converts who ended up back in Brazil as refugees. What was the fate of some of the other converts? Because not only have they adopted religion, but of course the Taliban come back into power, the US exits. What became of these people?
When the Taliban came back, so my phone at this very same day, my phone started, messages popping up, and I found it strange because they were messages from Afghanistan, and it was all these converted people that I had interviewed there, and just asking, help. We need to get out of here. The Taliban is already running the houses. They're looking for Christians.
Wow.
Not only in Afghanistan, this is very interesting and important to understand. Not only in Afghanistan, Christianity became really attached, really known as the religion of the West, of the invader, of the imperialist. So in Pakistan also it happens that sometimes they cannot revenge against the Pakistani army or the government or the American forces there, but they will do this against Christians. They will attack just Christians that are whatever Christians they meet. And sometimes it's their own people, Afghan converted, and they will just attack them because as a revenge against the US, against America, because of Christianity. In Pakistan is endemic, the number of attacks against Christians, because they are, and these attackers, they leave messages saying this is a message for America. There's nothing to do with, there's not much to do with religion sometimes. So these people, many came, it was a desperation, really, that you could feel coming from there. And this couple, Louise and Giz, who are the main characters, they flew to Pakistan and they helped smuggle pretty much all the families that they know of, including Muslims, because some of the families you could have, the father converted to Christianity, but the rest of the family was not. and even didn't know that the father was Christian. And so they smuggled everybody it was 87 families because they had, it was difficult to send them to the US. The US didn't receive this candidate. So this couple alone, and with the help of Jair Bolsonaro, who is a right wing, so that's where you
Another
see,
story.
it's another story, but you see the interconnection of politics. Bolsonaro was the president, and there was a very intense diplomatic discussions with the government, and Bolsonaro finally gave them humanitarian visas, and most of them were Christians.
So a number of the questions actually, Adriana, have to do with your career and your work. And so I'll also say you should take the first crack at this bundle of questions, but also, I mean, Graciela and Sarah, you're not just a couple of deadbeats up here. So you should also feel free to weigh in as well. But some of the questions were, how do you go about starting to build a career as a foreign correspondent? How do you report with nuance? How do you deal with the fact that if you're an outsider to a certain degree, how do you get past either imposter syndrome or the sense that maybe you don't have the cred to tell this story? So take any or all of those, because they all kind of, come together in a big hairball of professional careers.
Well, I think for me, it was I naturally didn't, was interested in international news. I was working already for the newspaper, and I went on, I did the master's degree at LSE, and I went on during the spring break to Egypt. It was my first time in the Middle East. And I went to Egypt because my best friend who was studying with me at LSE, she had reached the age of marriage, and her parents had, separated the three possible husbands for her to choose from, and she asked me and other friends to go with her to choose her husband. And it was a Brazilian, secular Brazilian, a Filipino who was Protestant Filipino, and a Jewish British girl, the best friend. And I realized that when we were together, there were no walls between us. So that was that watershed moment, that turning point. It was like, I want to go and go to these places that I think are highly stereotypied, and find a common ground with people from where I come from. So I just go as an observer. In the case of the book, I always made clear to them I'm a secular journalist. I think it's a story that is worth telling. Most people don't know about this except for in your own bubble. Sometimes even people who are evangelical, they don't know. Only people really involved with missions who know the massive extension of the movement. And I will report what I see, and what I don't see, I won't report on. So at this time in Egypt, one of our trips my trips with the couple, I lost my luggage in Cairo, and I told Louis, this is your chance, you want to do this miracle, you want to follow me, then you can do it. And we would, I think we learned how to respect each other. They would try to convert me, of course, trying to. And I respect their attempts, and always say, okay, it tells a lot about you. And in the beginning, I suffered with this more of like being an intruder and maybe betraying them as well, because those people who share their stories with us, they are, there would be no book without them.
Did they read the book?
They did.
And what did they say to you about it?
They said, oh, it's very great. It's a great book. You taught us things that we didn't know ourselves, but it's all in your head, reason, you want Jesus in your heart. They're so, it's really,
But I think there's a real teachable moment there that it's possible, you've proven this, to write in a way that's not a Valentine to these people. It's not a religious tract saying, look at their lives and see why you should accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior. You bring a critical intelligence throughout the book, and yet they could see that they've been dealt with honorable intention.
yeah, and I never lied to them about that, never ever. And I tried hard to find a way to explain to them, and I think I found peace to myself, with myself, by saying, when they asked many times, do you believe? Because they would tell me stories of miracles. Do you believe? And I finally found the answer. I believe that you believe. And that was true, because a couple is not gonna go to Afghanistan with two small children to pray. They had never been outside Brazil before. If they didn't trust, if they didn't believe.
I want to say just two
Yeah,
things
please,
about
Graciela,
that, about,
Sarah.
so, her career is very unusual. And, there's a few more people here, and another amazing Brazilian report journalist who have done, kind of broken the mold also. But, I remember being 20 in 19 and being in college in Buenos Aires and having this Bolivian reporter who had studied here at Columbia and had an international career as a reporter. And I remember it was like this moment of like, can I dream that dream? I mean, is that even, because it's so few examples. There's a huge barrier, which is language, you might note. We have accents. And so you have to, normally you have to just do it in English. And so you have to, you use your language, but at the same time, you have to you master another language that is not the language you were educated in. And then, so I just, and it's so hard to finance it, just to travel like you did, and it takes years in part. It's good that it took so many years because you follow that, that you have a long span of time. But I'm sure that, financials have a big, reason to do, and nobody will pay for that in America. So and there's no grants, and there's no philanthropy, and there's no, and there's publishing houses can't afford it. So, I am glad you did this, because there's a 19-year-old somewhere saying, I think Adriana Carranca, and it's important. And the other thing I wanted to say about the children, I really, and I did the same effort in my book, and I find it very hard because I'm a judgmental person. You don't have judgment on them. It was hard to, she didn't mention this because she wants you to read the book, so she's not going to tell you everything. But one of the things that is very striking to me and very moving in the book is how miserable they are. It's a very difficult, very dangerous life, and they put their little children in danger. And Adriana tells us, she gives us glimpses about not just this family, but another family that ends up tragically, and how the pain that their children are going through. I mean, how painful their life is and what it does to them. And I was just very admiring of you not passing judgment on that. I just really felt angry at them for the children. I just leave the children with their grandma, and it was just, it's really terrible. And, I'm a mom, I don't know. But I think that was exactly the right choice, because it's not your job, it's my job as a leader. Feel bad, but not you as a writer.
I think another beautiful thing about your personality, I like what you said, there's so few examples for many people of what it looks like to be an investigative reporter. And I think oftentimes popular culture represents like the foreign correspondent in particular as this like testosterone building, get the scoop. And there's so many other ways to report. And I've seen you report, so I know like the incredible empathy and care and trust building and relationship building it took, and time it took to tell this story. And so I love that you give us another model of what it looks like to not be extractive. And yeah, I guess the other really quick thing I would say around the question is just, I remember when I started out, and with that story, I mentioned my very first New Yorker piece. I came back, I thought I'd gotten the goods in Iraq and Afghanistan, because I realized like you really cannot wait for permission, because when you're a freelancer, like no one is really going to give that to you. And so I went and I got the story, I started pitching it, and I was literally told by an editor at Rolling Stone, I'm sorry, but if you could tell me who the Julia Roberts and the story would, in the movie version of the story would be, then maybe I would consider it. That's when I went to the bathroom and cried and felt like, how am I gonna ever be a journalist? But it was, I think then what I realized the charitable version of that comment was you have to give people someone to actually care about. It can't just be a laundry list of like horrific investigative findings or in your face, like this deep, incredible history. It's also about the deep humanity you put into this book of the families of the center. I think that's like what carries the day when you're starting out and knowing how to tell a good story.
Well, this hour has whizzed by. And I just have to thank Adriana, Graciela, and Sarah for such a trenchant conversation. For being such great models of journalism, and also education, in Graciela's case. And also thanks, of course, our friends at Book Culture, to the Overseas Press Club, to the Columbia Global Center, and Columbia Global Reports, and to all of you. There's nothing like, again, this is book #1. Appreciate it when you have a packed out house at a book event. Savor it.